Now, is it just me, or has there been an uptick in the number of one-hit wonders over the past couple of years? I mean, think about all the hot bands who have had just one good album, or maybe even just one good song, before they're completely forgotten. In the old days, a group developed and evolved over a series of albums, 3, 4, 5, 6 records even. It was slow and took a lot of patience and a lot of fighting to keep things together, but more often than not, it paid off. I mean, there's U2, REM, Blur, Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails. None of these bands were what you'd call immediate, instant, hit-it-out-of-the-park successes. Each group was allowed to build a career the old-fashioned way, slowly and carefully. And most importantly, they were allowed to make mistakes along the way and not be punished for them. Oh, you know who we missed in that list of bands? Radiohead. They started slow. I mean, really slow. They made a bunch of mistakes. They've conducted a lot of experiments, some successful, some failures. But because someone somewhere had faith in the group, and because the guys in Radiohead believe in themselves and each other, they have grown to become one of the biggest and most important and most revered bands in the world. This is the story of how they got that way.
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
just made me cry. I was in tears for ages. I just thought it was the best thing we'd ever done. So there's something about it. I love the way what he did with the guitar sound, and the way he mixed it, and just the way it's really jubilant to me, that song. And also it happened to be, at one time it was a song I thought we were going to lose, which I was really upset about, because the melody stayed with me for about 4 months without going away, which was, for me, is really unusual. It doesn't take me long to get bored, and I really never got bored of this song. Anytime I went for a walk anywhere or whatever, there it was.
Tom York and Ed O'Brien of Radiohead talking about There, There, the first single from their 2003 album, Hail to the Thief. Really creepy video, too, with weird stuffed animals and the magic trench coat and Tom turning into that screaming tree. Welcome to the show, and this is the first of a 4-part appreciation of Radiohead. Radiohead is one of those rare bands that comes along just a couple of times a decade, a group that captures the imagination of the world with their music and their live performances and their image and their mythology. Everything they do and say is documented down to the tiniest detail. Not only are they critical darlings, but they sell millions of records, even though they refuse to stick to any tried-and-true formulas. They don't have fans as much as they have disciples. Michael Stipe of REM says that Radiohead is so good that they're frightening. Bono and The Edge of U2 say that they're amazing. Radiohead, quite simply, is one of the most important and influential bands in the world right now. But who are these guys? We tracked all the music and the videos and the concerts, but what exactly is Radiohead made of? The actual personalities and the synergies that go into making October 7th, 1968. And Tom's this delicate little guy. He stands about 5'5". He's always been kind of skinny and sickly, which was of concern to his father, who was not only a chemical engineer but a championship boxer. He once gave Tom a pair of gloves, but whenever Tom tried to box, he'd just end up face down on the canvas. And then there's the eye thing. Tom was born with a paralyzed left eye. The eyelid, when he was born, was fixed in the down position. And at first, everybody thought it was going to stay that way. But then his parents took him to a specialist who figured a way to graft in a muscle. And the first 4 operations went very well. It was the 5th one that got screwed up. And as a result, Tom's got the droopy eye, and his vision is down to about 50% on that side. For his first couple of years in school, he had to wear an eye patch, and you can imagine how awful that was. And because he was so pale and thin, he picked up the name Salamander. He ended up in a lot of fights over that, and even the boxing lessons didn't help all that much. Here's a classic case of someone retreating into music because everything else in the world seemed to be so difficult. He got his first guitar at age 8, but he soon got so frustrated with it that he smashed the thing to pieces in a big temper tantrum. But he eventually got his act together a few years later, forming his first band at age 10. He later formed a punk band called TNT. He ended up being the singer because, well, no one else wanted to sing. And when he wasn't in class at school, Tom could be found hanging out in the music room. Tom's first song? A nuclear holocaust thing called Mushroom Cloud. Tom got all freaked out by a Cold War documentary on TV. And his first guitar hero? Brian May of Queen. Tom still loves the guitar solo in Bohemian Rhapsody. Colin and John Greenwood are brothers from Oxford, England. Colin was the bass player in TNT, and his brother John is a couple of years younger. If this makes any difference, John is colorblind. Thanks to an older sister who was into bands like Joy Division and The Fall, the two brothers got into music in their early teens. Ed O'Brien is also from Oxford. He's the tall guy. In fact, when he was about 14, he had a nice little gig going as the provider of porn for the rest of his class. So he was the only one tall enough to reach the top shelf where they kept the dirty magazines at the local newsstand. That made him very popular until the day one of the guys at the boarding school left a copy in his bed and ratted it out. Then there's drummer Phil Selway. He comes from a family of academics. Tom, Colin, and Ed met at the same private school in Oxford, a place called Albington, and they started playing together in their final year. 3 guitars and a bad drum machine named Dr. Rhythm. Their very first gig was at a friend's birthday party. This would be sometime in 1982, which means everybody was about 14 at the time. Drummer Phil Selway was drafted from an Albington group called Jungle Telegraph to replace the drum machine. Oh, and by the way, Phil is also a decent tuba player. Oh, and his nickname is Mad Dog because he used to be prone to big temper tantrums. Just thought I'd throw that in. As it turns out, the only day the guys could rehearse was Friday, so they became known as On a Friday. Tom, Phil, Colin, and Johnny couldn't tell their parents what they were doing because they were, let's just say that their parents disapproved of this dabbling in rock and roll. Colin's younger brother Johnny was at these practices too, not to play, but so that Colin could babysit him. And after hearing him whine about wanting to do something, everybody just kind of gave him and made him a part of the band. He was about 13 at the time, while everybody was 16 or 17. At first, On a Friday was all over the place. Johnny played harmonica, sometimes the recorder. Tom played keyboards. At one point, On a Friday featured an all-female horn section. At another time, there were 3 5 members of the band went on to different colleges. Ed O'Brien went to Manchester University. Colin landed a hard-to-get spot at Cambridge, where he studied English literature. Same thing with Phil, big English lit guy at Liverpool University. When he got out of grade school, Johnny Greenwood enrolled in both the music and psychology programs at Oxford. And Tom, well, he decided to take a year off before university. He spent some time selling men's suits, something that he hated, so he took a better job, working in a mental hospital. Then he went to university. And they all had jobs, too. Ed worked in a pizza parlor where physicist Stephen Hawking was a regular customer. It was really kind of weird because Professor Hawking orders pizza himself through his computerized voice device. Ed later worked as a bartender and in an old-fashioned tea room. Phil had a job as an editor at a publishing house that produced textbooks and academic works. He also did some teaching. And Tom? Well, Tom supplemented his income working as a DJ at the campus pub. And he was pretty good, too. His regular night was Friday, and he regularly attracted 1,000 people or more. It was here that Tom connected with a bouncer named Shaq, and they formed a band that they called the Headless Chickens, who ended up playing dozens of gigs before evolving into something called Flicker Noise. There was also another band called Kings of Thailand and Shindig. Meanwhile, once a month, all the On a Friday guys would get together on a Friday and rehearse and to plot what they might do together once this school thing was out of the way. We'll look at some of those plans in a second.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
For about 4 years, On a Friday got together occasionally to jam on new stuff and occasionally commit stuff to a cheap tape recorder. And by the end of about 1990, they had something like 15 original songs. Meanwhile, Colin, between shifts at a local record store called Manic Hedgehog, was also the school's entertainment director, which meant he was free to book On a Friday in the school's pubs whenever he felt like it. And when school was out for the summer, On a Friday we'd get the occasional gig, and they also spent some time busking on the street. It was somewhere around this time that On a Friday did two things. First of all 5 guys moved in together. They found a semi near the center of Oxford, and they recorded their first demo. 3 songs, 300 pounds. No title, no catalog number, just a cassette of 3 On a Friday songs. 1991. The big day that everybody remembers is July 22nd, 1991. That's when they played a show at the Hollybush Inn in Oxford, their first post-graduation gig. Now, it certainly wasn't their first gig, because you got to remember everybody had been playing together off and on for years, so by everyone's estimates, On a Friday had been on stage at least 100 times before this show at the Hollybush. The gig was described as 5 friends, 2 strobe lights, and a smoke machine. In other words, it was no big deal. It was the second gig that changed everything. It didn't come until October, when they played a local place called Jericho's Tavern, which, by this time, was semi-famous for hosting other big-ish Oxford bands like Supergrass and Ride and Slowdive. By that time, 2 things had happened. With the money they had earned through their part-time jobs, On a Friday had recorded a 5-song cassette which went on sale through that local indie record store I was talking about called Manic Hedgehog, £3 a copy. Word of mouth on the band had spread so fast that there were no fewer than 25 record company reps in the house that night. That was Colin's doing, because whenever label reps came into the record store, he'd slip them a copy of this tape. That cassette tape ended up being referred to as the Manic Hedgehog tape. And it features songs like this. It's called Philippa Chicken. By the end of October 1991, On a Friday were being stocked by various record company people. And by the end of the year, they finally had their record deal. On December 21st, they signed an 8-album deal with EMI. And they also had a new name, because, you see, On a Friday just didn't cut it. But what name should they pick? Being a band full of English majors, somebody suggested Jude the Obscure from the title of a Thomas Hardy novel, but that was too obscure. Then there was Music. Tom liked that one, but he was shouted down. Somebody suggested Gravitate, but that didn't have the right ring to it. But then somebody dug into Tom's DJ collection and pulled out a 1986 album by the Talking Heads called True Stories. And on that album, there was a song called Radiohead. So it came to pass on 21 December 1991, after just playing 8 formal gigs, On a Friday, now known as Radiohead, signed their first big major record label contract. Okay, there's your deep background. Now we're finally ready to start talking about Radiohead. More in a moment.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
The first proper Radiohead release, and I'm talking major label stuff, was an EP called Drill. It was May 5th, after a while. Part of the problem was the sound of the EP. Radiohead let their managers produce the thing, and these guys were enamored with a big hit on the radio at the time, which was a Nirvana track called Smells Like Teen Spirit, and the result was something of a confused mess. The second Radiohead single also got off to a bad start. It was a song that Tom wrote while he was at university. He was in the middle of a drinking binge, and he was feeling rather maudlin about his chances with girls. So, yes, if you've always thought that this song sounds like it was written in an alcoholic stupor by a depressed university student, you'd be absolutely right. Tom was pining over a girl who he used to see in the cafes and bars around Oxford. 8 months of unrequited love came out in these lyrics. Tom has never revealed her name, but he has said she knows who she is. Tom had actually hidden the song from the rest of the band because he thought it was so weak and wimpy. And when he finally presented it at rehearsal, Johnny Greenwood couldn't hold back. He just hated the song. He just hated it. It was weak. It was whiny. It just plain sucked. Even when Johnny was outvoted and the song was taken into the studio, he still tried to sabotage everything. He kept inserting these loud, grinding scratches across his guitar strings just before the chorus. He was being a jerk. He was trying to piss everybody off, so they'd just abandon the whole idea and move on to something cooler. Now, here was one of those weird, serendipitous moments in music. When Radiohead ran through the song in preparation for a proper take, their producers secretly pressed record. And it reached number 78 on the charts. And the BBC played the song twice. Yes, twice, before pulling it from the playlist completely. They said it was too depressing. Even their record company had doubts. However, Creep would end up having more lives than a cat, despite the fact that Radiohead tried to kill it many times. But every time they tried to destroy it, it just came back stronger than ever. In fact, it's now considered to be one of the three great slacker anthems of the early 1990s, ranking right up there with Smells Like Teen Spirit and Loser from Beck. Now, we're going to get back to that whole story in just a bit. We have to continue on with something else first. For the time being, Radiohead had to get another single out there. So in February of 1992, they elected to go with a new recording of Anyone Can Play Guitar, one of the songs that appeared on the Manic Hedgehog tape back in October of 1991. Now, this seemed like a really good idea. Radiohead had been using the song to start their live sets, and people seemed to like it. And things worked out okay. In fact, it's an answer to the trivia question, what was Radiohead's first top 40 hit? It was Anyone Who Can Play Guitar, which reached number 32 on the British charts. February 92 also marked the release of Radiohead's debut album, February 22nd, actually, and they called it Pablo Honey. And you know where they got the title from? Remember those Jerky Boys and their crank phone calls? Radiohead was given a Jerky Boys tape by another English group called Chapter House, and there's one bit where somebody makes a call to a guy and pretends to be his mother, and the conversation opens with the phrase, Pablo Honey.
That's right, yeah. The Jerky Boys' Pablo Honey, the title of our album, we took from one of the sketches there, but it's not actually on the CD, and it's actually one of the cleanest sketches. It's kind of, there's an underground tape going round that we had, so that's where it's from.
The members of Radiohead, all considering themselves to be, mama's boys, decided that this was somehow an appropriate title for their debut album, so that's what they did. The band started out a string of 350 live shows, featuring an uphill battle to be taken seriously. But then they got lucky, very lucky, and everything changed again. Back in a moment.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Radiohead's first tour as a major label act began with very few expectations in February of 1993. The first place they played outside the UK was, believe it or not, Tel Aviv, Israel. Radiohead played 3 shows there, March 31st and April 1st and 2nd, 1993. They didn't know it at the time, but those would turn out to be some of the most important shows they would ever play. That's where we'll pick things up next time as we continue with our 4-part dissection of everything that is Radiohead. Technical production is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, a Deep Sky production.